Good evening. Welcome. Thanks so much for coming out tonight, and welcome to the first of the spring semester of the Crossroads of Ideas. My name is Laura Heisler, and I am Director of Programming for the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation and Director of Outreach for the Mortgage Institute for Research, and also connected to the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery. So I have roles with all three of the organizations that are housed in this building, and the three of our organizations collectively come together to put this series together in the spirit of this town center that you're sitting in, which was always intended to create a connection between the campus and the community on issues that matter to all of us. And this Crossroads of Ideas series is based on the premise that we want to tackle issues that are in the news, sometimes front page, sometimes science page, that also are the subject of groundbreaking research here at UW-Madison, and that's what this series aims to bring you. We cover a wide range of topics. We have a full program tonight, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I do want to introduce you to some of the things we have coming this semester and tell you a little bit about how this evening is going to go. So first things first, in terms of some housekeeping, we record all of these sessions. You'll be able to find the recording on the discovery.wisc.edu page in about a week or so if you're interested in taking a look at it or sending it to someone. Because we record it, when we get to the Q&A, which will be at about 1:45, we're going to ask that you wait for one of our mic runners to reach you before you start asking your question. People never remember that, so I'm telling you now. When the time comes, the moderator will remind you to please just wait for the mic to get to you. Otherwise, we don't capture it, and also people can't hear you. So that would be much appreciated. I want to take just a moment to let you know about some of the upcoming sessions. We have a record-breaking number of Crossroads talks this semester. There's a lot going on campus. In particular, many of you may know that this will be the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, which originated right here at UW-Madison. And so in honor of that, and in partnership with the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies, we have 3 sessions in the month of March. April, of course, is when Earth Day takes place, and we don't want to compete with all of the Nelson Institute events, so we're doing a sneak peek of Earth Day throughout the month of March, and you can see these events here. And then some other dates to capture finishing up this semester. You might want to make a note on your calendars for April 14th, April 28th, and May 12th. All of these are Tuesday evenings, and Crossroads always takes place on a Tuesday. So with that, no further ado, I want to turn things over to my colleague Gavin Luter from the University Alliance, who will be your moderator, and we'll kick things off tonight.
Weren't sure if you should applaud for me. Wait and see. Good evening, everyone. My name is Gavin Luter. I'm Managing Director of the University Alliance at UW-Madison. And essentially what we are is a network of leaders on campus at UW-Madison who are trying to think seriously and deeply about how we can get UW-Madison thinking about its, kind of the world urban future. We want to make sure it's not a scary place. We want to make sure it's a decent place. Cities could either be really good or really bad, and you can see that in the news all the time. So we are a group of people who are concerned about that on campus, and part of how we try to reorient the university is by doing speaker series like this, and we also manage the University Year program, which is a very structured engagement, 3 years between local governments and UW-Madison across the state. So currently we're working with Pepin County, but next year we're going to be working with Wisconsin Rapids, Milwaukee County, La Crosse County, and a variety of issues that are determined by them. So if you want to know more, go to our website. I didn't tell Laura I was going to do this, but I'm taking a point of personal privilege as moderator to tell you to go to our website, university.wisc.edu, and you can find out a little bit more about our program coming up on March 19th. 12 to 1 a webinar sponsored by WEDC, Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, and we encourage you to check out our Urban Future Speaker Series, and this is one of the events that we have coming up. So definitely check it out, and if you're interested and you don't know about the university, see what we did, University, okay? All right. Just want to make sure you all get that. So it's university.wisc.edu if you're interested in learning more about what we do. And I am moderator of this panel, but what essentially that means is I introduce people and get out of the way because they're a lot smarter than I am. I know about housing. I know it's a big issue, but they have a lot more intelligent things to say than I do. So I'm going to get out of the way, and we're essentially going to do one by one. We have about 9 minutes, and I've already told the panelists I will cut you off at about 9 minutes. And that's because we want to make sure that we have at least 15 minutes of question and answer afterwards. So Without further ado, I'm going to call up our first panelist, who is Tom Landgraf. He is a senior lecturer in the School of Business in the real estate program, and he's also a developer, so he has a unique perspective on this practice. So without further ado, Tom Landgraf.
Thanks, Kevin. I am the leadoff hitter here, and my role is to acquaint you with a few concepts and a little bit of the math on how affordable housing and workforce housing come together. You'll hear some of these terms from the other three speakers, so hopefully they won't be too off-putting to you when they talk about them and you scratch your head and say, I wonder what that means. So what I want to do is talk about the big picture, do a couple of key concepts, and then show you an example of something that is going to be hopefully closing in March and starting construction in April in Horicon, which is shifting the paradigm a bit on housing. So the housing crisis, you've all lived through it. This chart tells you about everything you need to know. For quite a few years, the rate of growth of single-family homes and median income stayed pretty much connected. Then we have the Great Recession, run-up, the fall-off, a good time to buy housing in 2011, and now we're back up again, except the gap is narrowing here, and it wasn't narrowed here. And part of that is what's causing the shortage. Nationally, we're at pre-recession levels as far as new home construction. That's putting huge pressure on existing housing. You've probably seen it. A lot of houses that would typically have been starter homes are now getting acquired for cash-out transactions and getting converted to higher income or higher cost housing. What that's resulted in, for a period of time we had overbuilding and now we have underbuilding. And as you can see, it's a pretty significant gap. So keeping that in mind is something that we need to do, because this is an externality that we can't really fix in Dane County. We can certainly look at a few things. Okay, underbuilding, what does Wisconsin look like? Here are the top 20 counties, and you can see the second one on the list, Dane County, leads the pack. There are 9 communities here that produced, had more growth than housing, and Dane County, as you can see, is shooting the lights out. So that underbuilding that we were just looking at here, when you look at it in Wisconsin, Dane County is where the biggest gap is occurring. So it does not surprise anyone that we're having some issues. So what is affordable housing? So very briefly, the national standard for affordable housing is when rent plus basic utilities, that's heat and light and water, when rent plus those utilities is more than 30% of your income, regardless of what your income is, when they're equal, you're in balance. So the national standard anywhere in the country is when you're spending 30% of your income in a particular geographic area for rent and utilities, you should be okay. When that gets out of whack is when you have problems. Now in Dane County, in 2017, the median income for renters was $42,189, and the median rent was $1,053, and when you do the math on $42,189, which is right here, that's the number you should be spending for rent, that's the number you were spending. So in 2017, things were kind of in balance overall in the county. But when you look a little further at that, here you see the breakout by various area median income levels. 30% is the one that is the most critical because this is the lowest of the ranges of affordable housing. And as you'll see when you look at that, here it's broken out by family size, and then when you do the math of the rent plus utilities and 30%, this is the rent that you get for these groups. So somebody at 60% should be able to afford for a person of one $963 for rent, and when you're at 30%, that's roughly half of that. The shortage and the pressure point for affordable housing in the county is not at the 60% level, it's at the 30 and 40% level, because that's where there's a significant shortage. So you'll hear it talked about as the housing gap and something called housing cost burden. So what do we have here? These are the renter households. There are 18,338 households in Dane County at that 30% level. There are 7,526 units for them to rent and have them at 30% of the county median. So what you see is in Dane County, at that 30% level, we're short 10,812 apartments for people at 30%. That's the housing gap that we're talking about. Now, when you spend more than 30% of your income for housing, which most of the people at the 30% level need to do, then they are cost burdened. So maybe they're spending 35 or they're spending 40 or 45. So housing gap, the absolute shortage of housing to keep everybody at the 30% equilibrium level, and the cost burden, or housing burden, where they're going to be spending more than 30% to rent. And what that means is they're not doing other things. The last thing I just want to mention is an acronym called ALICE. It stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed. So we deconstruct that. Asset limited, not a lot of cash in the bank. Income constrained, might be education. Also might be a single parent with a couple of children. They need childcare. There's not childcare generally available in the area past 6 o'clock. So that's a problem. They could take a better job. They've got the education for a better job. They don't have childcare. That's the income constraint piece of it. And they're employed. The data is prepared by United Way. There's a survival and a stability budget. Here it is, the survival budget for Dane County. And of course, you can see over here, 2 adults, 1 infant, 1 preschooler. They're spending twice as much for childcare as they are for rent. So trying to help that family's bottom line could be getting them cheaper housing, could also be getting them cheaper childcare. It's easier to do childcare from a real estate development standpoint, timeline, than it is to do affordable housing. It takes about 3 years, if we started today, to be able to have a grand opening for affordable housing. It doesn't take nearly that long to build a childcare center and get it operational. The ALICE budget translates everything into wages, and you can see what the hourly wages are for those houses. So, last piece is rent components. What is significant to know is that the way to make housing affordable is not to build it cheap. We have all driven past examples of housing built in the 50s and 60s when the theory was to make it affordable, we're going to strip it down to the bare bones. Neighborhoods don't like that, residents don't like that. The way to change it is to change the financing. And what this chart is showing you is the blue slice tells you what percentage of rent goes to pay for the financing. So if somebody's telling you there's paying $1,000 a month for a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom apartment, half of that is going to financing. The goal now with all of the programs that are out there is to be able to reduce the financing burden, not necessarily make the units smaller or without amenities. So here's the shift of the paradigm, and then I'll be out of time. So when I say single-family housing to you, you think this. You might want to think this, which is the typical area. There's six houses here, there are 13 houses here. Those are smaller homes. What we're not talking about is tiny homes you buy on Amazon or the house that you see on wheels. We're talking about this beauty. 1,100 square feet, full basement, attached garage. Build them in a pocket neighborhood like this. Build them exactly backwards. So you're standing at the front door looking at the porch. When you go in the house, you walk into the kitchen and the family room where people spend time. The living room is on the back side of the house. So the families all sitting around their kitchen table can look out into the pocket neighborhood and see what's going on. So that development is going to be starting in Horicon, Wisconsin, hopefully closing in March and going in April. It's 20 units in a pocket neighborhood. It's sponsored by the Housing Authority, the Dodge County Housing Authority. It will be for people at 30% of the county median, all 20 of the houses.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. Next, we have Olivia Perry, who's a senior planner in the Dane County government. I'm serious, Olivia, I will cut you off. Okay, take it away.
I got my phone right here. Where's the timer? Good evening. It's nice to be here. I've never been to this building before. It's beautiful. Who's responsible for this building? So, again, my name is Olivia Perry. I'm a senior planner in the Dane County Planning and Development Department, and I pretty much live and breathe housing for the county. I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about the housing crisis and how one of the ways that Dane County approaches it. I do think that we have some similar information to share with you about the housing gap and what it means and some jargon. So I'm actually going to test you since he already gave you the information. And then I'm going to talk about some local programming and housing initiatives that the county pursues. So, okay, so what is affordable housing? How much do you have to pay? And if you pay more, what are you called? Right. So here's another one. If you pay more than 50%, you're actually called extremely cost burdened. So people are in this county that are paying 50% of their income, monthly income or more on housing. So this is a little bit of a different slide. Right now, the area median income, where's my pointer? All right. 100,400 is the area median income for a family of 4. When we're talking about affordable housing, at least in Dane County, what we're talking about is folks that are 60% or below area median income. That is the focus of all of our programs. We don't focus on anything above that. It's generally called middle housing in the middle, or middle housing. And there's a huge gap in that area, but that's not what we're focusing on. We're focusing on housing for residents who are 60% or below. So you can see in number 1, 35,000 for 2019. That person will have to pay. I can't walk away from the microphone. I'm stuck. $878. And WIDA sets these limits here. So they're the ones who determine what the income limits are and how much people have to pay. Say for a family of 2, 48,000 at 60% AMI, 1,130 would be your rent, and that's rent plus utilities, as Tom was saying. So we define a housing gap again. The number of units needed at a certain price versus the number of units available. 10,812, as Tom mentioned. The other gap that we're looking at is the extremely cost burden, number of houses and renters combined who are paying more than paying more than 50,000. And combined, that's 16,540 households in Dane County that are paying more than 50% of the area median income. It's a little bit over 7% of all households in Dane County. What you'll see on the top is that the biggest, most significant change is folks who are making 30% AMI or less have grown the most out of all the changes from the last reporting period to this reporting period. So they've gone up almost 27% since 2010. There's been an increase in cost burden renter households who are 30 to 50%, but it's a much smaller increase. There's also been an increase in homeowners, 30% AMI or below of 12%. And those are, generally when you're talking about 30% or below, a lot of those folks tend to be seniors, disabled, vets, that kind of thing. But also working people, it's $7.25. I think the minimum wage is $7.25. There are a lot of working people who are actually at that level too. And then we had a good news with extremely cost burdened owner households. Those went down by 18.6%. So if we were going to close the housing gap, Dane County and the city of Madison produced 578 workforce housing units last year with our revolving loan, with our loan funds. Actually, they're not loans, with our funds. And if we were going to just close the rental gap, it would take 22.6 years at 578 units a year. I'm not sure it's hard to maintain that level. We had a peak of funding last year because some of the projects in prior years didn't come through, so we had extra money last year. So I'm not sure that, and so 22.6 years people have to wait who are extremely cost burdened to find a home or to find housing that's acceptable or affordable. And then how are we going to, when can we close the housing gap on single family housing? Well, the answer to that question is we can't, although Tom has just thrown down the gauntlet with his pocket neighborhood. But the only other developer in the state of Wisconsin that I know that actually builds affordable single family homes is Habitat for Humanity. And in Dane County, they build 5, maybe 6 homes. They did acquire a large parcel in Sun Prairie, and they're going to be developing a subdivision in Sun Prairie. But as you can see from the square foot cost, people don't have $350,000 is, people don't have, their starter homes don't exist anymore. It's really mixed income housing. And in addition, we're going to add another 40,000 people into the households over the next 20 years. And from the trends that we're seeing, we're going to be seeing a larger percentage of our population who are lower income. That's just been growing over time. So, what are the impacts? Tom talked about how we've been underproducing housing, 11,000 units in Dane County between 2006 and 2017. So we're no longer able to afford to supply affordable or workforce housing. And I use the term workforce housing you saw earlier. I use that interchangeably. Most of my work is with the communities outside the city of Madison. Workforce housing just seems to be more understandable, and it doesn't carry a lot of the baggage that we know about from affordable housing when we first tried it in the 60s and 70s. But I thought this would be interesting. Okay, so these homeowners and these renters that are paying more than 50% of their area median income are actually going without food. They're going without basic necessities: healthcare, food, clothing, housing supplies, things that you think of and that you take for granted, right? We have 16,000 households that are experiencing this kind of burden. So when I was born in 1965, median income was $6,900. In 2019, the housing to income ratio was 1-3. In 2019, it's 1-5. Okay, so let me just, so that's just sort of give you an idea of like how bad it's gotten. So there are lots of programs. I don't have time to go into all the programs that are available in Dane County, but tax credits are the big program that get the larger mixed income developments built. So when you hear about a new mixed income, a new workforce housing or affordable housing project going up, it's typically, they're all mixed income. They're never 100% affordable anymore. That was a mistake from the past. So now so we're actually adding new market rate units. Municipalities have a whole bunch of different tools that they can use, primarily tax increment financing, and Village of Oregon was the first one to create an affordable housing fund. If you extend the life of your TIF for 1 year, you can actually use that increment to create a housing fund. So we provided $7.2 million in housing funds last year that went to 5 communities: Madison, Mount Horeb, Fitchburg, Cottage Grove, or maybe that's four different communities. We have a CDBG home program. $1.6 million went to down payment assistance, rental construction, major and minor home repair for 41 families. And Dane County Human Services serves those most in need with the Dane County Housing Help Desk, Joining Forces for Families, Briar Patch, and Salvation Army. I manage an initiative called the Dane County Housing Initiative, which started in 2015, and it's a public-private partnership of elected officials, local government staff, businesses, banks, developers, residents, housing agencies. And we develop education, research, communication to do capacity building and develop strategies to expand housing opportunities in Dane County. Some of the things we do, we have an annual housing summit. We sold out for the last 2 years. 250 people came to our summit. I'd like to invite you to the summit September 23rd at Monona Terrace. And we also produce video, have a newsletter, and have a website. I encourage you to go to those. And then the Housing Authority has 1,200 vouchers to provide for lower income tenants. And the City of Madison gave out $5.5 million in their affordable housing fund last year. And that's not my slide. Thank you very much.
Okay, next we have Dr. Revel Sims, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Planning and Landscape Architecture, I think to give a critique, a little bit of a different perspective on affordable housing. So, Revel.
Hi, good evening. Okay, so the way I understand it, the primary cause of crisis of affordability is the production of scarcity. And in today's highly global, highly urban world where proximity and access play more important roles in economic and social life, urban land and built environments are highly valued spaces. A tangible representation of this scarcity is the visible decline in the number of affordable housing units all across the country. As Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies recently observed, the number of units renting for under $800 fell by 1 million in 2017 alone, continuing a more long-term reduction of 4 million such units, a loss between 2011 and 2017. From a policy perspective, there are really only three mechanisms we have to deal with housing affordability. One is filtering, the other one is tax credit subsidies, and vouchers. And so by way of a brief critical assessment of these mechanisms, I would like to offer some thoughts on how we might actually address the relatively permanent, structural, and worsening crisis in housing affordability today. So the first mechanism we have is an entirely market-based approach to create so-called naturally occurring affordable housing by facilitating new high-end luxury housing production and then allowing these units to gradually filter down the income scale as they age so that they eventually become available to lower income households. If this approach sounds familiar, it probably should, since the discourse around filtering closely resembles the ideology of trickle-down economics, and is similarly used to support the idea that we can build our way out of this crisis. However, the belief that luxury housing reduces rents is based on an exaggeration of the process. Does filtering occur? Yes, there's little doubt that building new rental units helps to reduce rents overall. The big question for us is really about where, when, and by how much. So recent research offers some helpful conclusions. One study that found that if you increase the housing stock by 5% in the wealthiest neighborhoods, a really unrealistic scenario from the outset given the highly exclusionary design of most wealthy neighborhoods, that the reductions in rent in those neighborhoods would go down less than 0.5%, essentially making the actual impact on affordable housing negligible at best. A paper that came out last year analyzing housing in New York offers similar findings. It showed that a city would need to increase their total housing stock by an astonishing 10% to reduce rents a mere 1%. Applied to the Madison metro area with the most recent data from the 2018 ACS, this would mean an increase of almost 11,000 new units would drop median rents by approximately $11, not much savings. Interestingly, the same study also found that rent reductions are limited to nearby housing units, meaning that affordability from luxury housing production tends to benefit the best neighborhoods. Another study from a couple of years ago revealed the slow pace of change, showing that housing filters down at a rate of 1.9% per year. And this may sound great, but according to the report, at that rate, real income of arriving occupants in a 50-year-old home would be 60% less than the income of an occupant of a newly built home. So in other words, it takes at least a few generations before natural market-driven filtering process might produce housing that is affordable to those that actually need it. And the question at that point, of course, would become at what cost, at what sacrifice in quality would manifest in order to make filtered housing affordable. Until then, evidence shows that rent reductions from new housing production generally go to the most affluent renters. The only meaningful intervention to directly create affordable housing that we have is known as the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, or LIHTC program. And by many accounts, the program is a success. About $8 billion is allocated to states every year through the program, and over its roughly 30-year lifespan, it has produced over 47,000 projects and 3 million housing units. And while this is certainly impressive, it's important to compare these figures to the $134 billion in subsidies the federal government provides to homeowners through the mortgage interest deductions, real estate tax deductions, capital gains exclusions, and other expenditures. A critical review of the program reveals certain important limitations. LIHTC program fails to serve the lowest income households. They generally serve households that make an average of 60% area median income. And in Wisconsin, properties receiving the credit are only required to reserve at least 20% of units for households with incomes at or below 50% the county median income. LIHTC projects are also subject to local approval, which means they generally face NIMBYistic opposition. So for example, in February last year, some of you may remember that the city of Middleton rejected a proposal for affordable housing project on University Avenue that would have provided 39 affordable housing units. And importantly, even when it is successful, LIHTC is not a permanent solution. LIHTC properties are only required to be affordable for 30 years, after which they can lose their income restrictions and rent can rise to market rates. As of 2015, an estimated 2 million units remain active, but nearly 50,000 units have left the program, and another 200,000 units had inconclusive program status. As a market-based approach, LIHTC is also particularly vulnerable to downturns and changes in the tax code. So LIHTC production and preservation slowed dramatically during the Great Recession, falling 47% from program peak. Finally, LIHTC is susceptible to rising construction costs and fraud. I won't go into that one right now for lack of time. Lastly, important, where am I? There it is. Okay, lastly, and probably most importantly, there is the Housing Choice Voucher program, sometimes referred to as Section 8. It's the largest low-income housing program in the U.S. and works by subsidizing the difference between 30% of a household income and the rents that private market landlords charge. 2015, the program served 2.2 million households, and in 2014, the program spent $16 billion on housing assistance payments. Never mind, of course, that the subsidies for homeowners are roughly 7 times this amount. As a fundamentally market-based approach to producing affordability by subsidizing landlords, the voucher program is susceptible to all of the existing problems that not only create housing crisis in the first place, but also, and importantly, the racism and discrimination that continually permeates housing markets despite over half a century of fair housing laws. Voucher holders are disproportionately poor, more likely to be headed by women and have children, and thus it is not surprising that despite the discourse that vouchers are about the freedom to choose, we know that voucher holders tend to end up in neighborhoods with higher poverty, higher shares of non-white populations, and higher unemployment rates. In addition, because landlords are not required to accept voucher recipients, in many jurisdictions without income anti-discrimination legislation, landlords are able to openly discriminate against voucher holders. And possibly just as problematic in terms of today's changing urban context and almost ubiquitous gentrification pressures is that in tight housing markets, landlords are less likely to participate in the program, and voucher holders struggle to find available housing in desirable neighborhoods. So where does that leave us? One conclusion we may draw is that housing policy is essentially a myth, and the primary motivation for state action in the housing sector is, as Madden and Marcuse have recently argued, more to do with maintaining political and economic order than actually solving the housing crisis. If we're interested in tackling the problem of affordability, then we should consider ways to fundamentally challenge the hyper-commodification of housing. Two relatively achievable mechanisms we have toward this end are rent stabilization and expanding and improving public housing. The inflationary pressures that make housing unaffordable are only partially related to construction costs. They're also about land values. But land value, unlike the direct improvements on the land, arises from really the deep network of social investments that create values associated with particular locations. These investments often occur over generations, so some portion of the land value that is captured by landlords through increasing rent is essentially a form of theft that robs society at large. In this sense, restricting rents through some form of rent stabilization, possibly through modification of Wisconsin's anti-gouging legislation, is one way to prevent owners of rental housing from stealing socially created value. A second, more long-term but certainly achievable method to create high-quality, permanently affordable housing is to do it ourselves through some form of municipally funded social housing. And considering how much money is often provided to incentivize development that often exacerbates unevenness and scarcity in the housing market, and the money we lose when subsidized units expire and rise to market rates, it makes sense from both an economic and social perspective, I believe, to maximize these public expenditures. Intervention in the housing sector through direct provision of quality social housing has historically been the only permanent mechanism to deal with housing affordability, and we should begin to think seriously of how we might create a new version for the 21st century. 9 minutes?
Right, all right. Okay. Finally, for a practitioner perspective and quasi-academic as well, Dr. Ruben Anthony from the Urban League here in the Greater Madison area. So welcome, Dr. Anthony. Oh, yeah, excuse me.
I'm a Baptist deacon, so I can't promise you that I'll be 9 minutes. So, hey, the Urban League of Greater Madison is, I'm going to flip through a bunch of slides pretty fast to try to stick with your 9 minutes. But the Urban League of Greater Madison is the second oldest civil rights organization in the nation, founded in 1910. We've been in Madison for 50 years. Our goal is to educate, employ, and empower African Americans and poor people. So we jumped into this housing issue maybe 20 years ago, and we jumped into it because here in Madison you have a 2% vacancy rate, so it's hard to find rental housing. But also, when you look at the statistics, across the nation, 42% of African Americans are able to afford homes, but Madison is the worst in the nation because only 17% of African Americans here in Madison are homeowners. So it's rare to see families be homeowners here. We got to change that. So we have two programs. Initially, we had a program that took advantage of low-income tax credit, the LIHTC that you heard earlier. We purchased over 50 homes, and we put these individuals in the homes, and it was a 15-year lease-to-own program. If they learned how to manage the house and they did well throughout the 15 years, met the goal, they would get this house after 15 years, but they also get the equity. Equity in home ownership is the key to the American dream, and is also the key to wealth building, so we want to be a part of that. Again, we also used LIHTC, and we used our Section 42 tax credits. And so these single-family homes, we've got like 8 left. And so we're going to get rid of 4 this year to families, then we got 4 more to go. And so we've had a very good history with this program. We've been able to give families over $1 million or so in savings. When we talk about affordability, individuals who got these homes were in 40 to 60% of the area median income. 65% of the families that took our homes were females, and 85% were people of color. So the families benefited from having stable homes, newly renovated homes, and no down payment, on these homes that they were able to get. The community impacted in a great way, again, because we're able to give these individuals average equity of about $50,000, and we've seen savings grow consistently on average of about like $8,000 and collectively about $248,000. So the program was an award-winning program. Mutual of America looked at our program and said, this scattered housing program that you have is one of the best in the nation, and they recognized us in 2017. So what's next? So we said after we get rid of these next 4 houses, we still need to be in this space because the challenge still exists. And so we'll still do scattered housing. We'll look for condos and those sorts of things, but we want to gear up because we can't get out of this space. When I started my job at the Urban League, people were saying, maybe you should get out of this. There are enough people in that, but there are not enough people in here that's helping Latinos and African Americans and poor people, find housing. So home ownership, is important. Wealth building is important. And right now in our city, South Madison, where it's the longest African American enclave in the city, is being gentrified real quick. So in our next deal, We are going to put a $5 million new market tax credit deal together. We're going to acquire 15 homes, but in our market, we expect to address those who are 60% to 120%. So it'll be affordable housing, but it'll also be workforce housing. And so we want to make sure that we are helping build wealth with these for African Americans and poor people who might not have an opportunity to have homes. So we're going to do coaching, we're going to do training, and this time there'll be homeowners right away. They don't have to wait 15 years. Once they come into our program, we'll do the financing for 7 years. They'll get like an average equity in their house, plus they'll get a savings because we're going to give them interest-only loans, and what they would typically pay for principals, we're going to put that in an escrow account. And 7 years out, when they take us out with a refinance, they're going to have a savings plus they'll have equity. This is how wealth is built in this country. So again, it's coming soon, and I got it done in 9 minutes. So.
Can I have the panelists come on up? In the meantime, in this transition time, I wanted to give a special shout out to Joel Rogers, who's one of the co-chairs of the University Alliance. Can you just wave your hand? He is part of the, oh, you have a slide? Okay. He's part of the reason why the University Alliance exists, and he helped hire me. So thank you, Joel, for everything that you do to keep University Alliance going. Okay. I've definitely seen, these kind of moderators who like pretend they have really interesting questions and then they monopolize the entire time. I'm not going to do that at all because I've realized the wisdom is in the room. You are smarter than I am probably, but I'm going to give the mic really quickly. Our first, this was a plant. It was a plant. And we actually have, if you are interested in getting involved in affordable housing right now, there is an opportunity. So the first question will go to this, my new friend here, who I've forgotten his name. We just met.
Oh, thank you, Gavin. My name is Peter Gray. Thank you so much. I'll be brief. I'm here on behalf of the Dane County Housing Authority tonight, and I've just got a question or comment for our panelists and also for everyone in the room. The Dane County Housing Authority is looking for a new executive director. I am Peter Gray with the QTI Group, and I'm the executive recruiter who's working with Dane County Housing Authority. So I'm really grateful to get to be speaking to a panel and a room of passionate affordable housing experts in Dane County. I want to give, I have business cards, and I have a slip with a link to more information about the job. I'm hoping that our panelists might know someone, or someone in this room might themselves be interested and qualified, or might spread the word to someone they know who's interested and qualified to apply for the position. I'm going to leave a pile of slips with the link to more information about the job right up here on the moderator's beverage table, along with some business cards.
I have a beverage table.
Yeah,
pretty cool.
It's a beverage table. Oh, did I just make that up? Is that?
No, I like it.
Okay,
I love
great.
it.
We'll go with it. So please take one and take a look and spread the word. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Peter.
Okay.
Yeah, opportunities, great. Okay, so wait until the mic gets to you, but if there is a question, please raise your hand, and Laura/Phil Donahue will come on over.
A question for any or all of the panelists. To what extent do you think that community land trusts represent a valuable part of the solution to the crisis?
And let me just jump in and say, not everybody has to answer all the questions so that we can get to as many questions as possible, but who wants to take a stab?
That pocket neighborhood that I showed you, the 20 units, the housing authority, the Dodge County Housing Authority will own the land. So that's not part of the housing cost. That's similar to a land trust, but because it takes the cost of the land out of the transaction. Those 1,150 square foot homes with the full basements and the detached garages will come online for between $250,000 and $275,000. And those are rental, but they could easily be you do the same thing and sell them.
Okay, anybody else want to weigh
I
in?
just would like to ask Justice to answer this question, Justice Castaneda,
Castaneda.
who's the Executive Director of Commonwealth Development, because he actually oversees a
you-
land trust.
Do you want to say anything
Do you wanna-
about community land trust, Justice?
As a solution, it's
Again,
not.
the wisdom's in the room here. Come on.
Sorry,
Yeah, okay,
Ruben.
so to everyone's point, what you're doing there is you're taking housing and making it not a commodity. But the deal is that the Madison Area Community Land Trust is as much a nonprofit as it was an actual land trust. So yes, putting land into trust so that there's no way to make money off of it is a good idea. And cities and counties should do it whenever they can. The deal is there's not a whole lot of open land to just do that to or to do that with. I would say that as a city or as a municipality, they should stop selling open land and they should hold on to it like Oscar Mayer, or if you're hearing about golf courses, it's a good opportunity for them to hold on to land, to keep that permanently affordable and to take, again, the land out of the transaction. I think there's a lot of opportunity for that and they should do it whenever they can.
Cool. Next question we're going to take from this side of the room.
Hi, thank you. My question has to do with what is happening in Dane County to integrate services to help people get health care, daycare, in some cases employment services, job skill training, all of the things that go into being able to afford a house.
Okay, so all the supportive services, wraparound services.
So
that
what's
enable
happening to
people.
integrate
Yeah.
all of those things?
Well,
I-
go ahead, do you want to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so the Area Resource ADRC, we have a lot of programs in Dane County that we fund. We have pass-through money that goes to a whole wide variety of organizations that does that. And in addition to that, we just created a new division in Dane County called the Housing Access and Affordability Division. It just launched last month, so you'll be hearing more about that kind of organizing, being a one-stop shop for folks to get that training. But of course, we also have the Job Center, which provides a lot of job training, resume writing. But an ADRC actually focuses on seniors, but we have a lot of those services in Dane County. And we probably need to do a better job marketing them, but certainly, yeah, they are available.
Ruben, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I do think when you want to make a family or a person successful with housing, you have to look at the whole person, and there's a lot of challenges and barriers that they face. And so at the Urban League, we look to bring people into sustainable wage jobs, and we have had many people come through our training programs, whether it's with Exact Sciences, whether it's with the trades, whether it's with CUNA Mutual, and these different partner organizations, but then they build up the necessary job income that allows them to afford houses, and they have come into our housing program. So I think that agencies have to look at the complete person in a 365-degree way and get them the support that they need to remove the barriers so that they can afford housing.
Mm-hmm. Tom, you want to weigh in too?
Yeah, we'll go back to the 20-unit pocket neighborhood. Wisconsin has a program called Wisconsin Shares. If you're 200% of the poverty level or less, the state will pay a portion of your child care. It's based on your income. The lower income you are, the less you pay, the more the state pays. For you to use that program, you have to be in a state-licensed child care center. There are two categories: a family child care center for 1 to 8 children, intended to be run out of someone's home, and a group child care center, more than 8. Those 20 single-family homes are going to be constructed so that they meet the state's criteria for a person to run a child care center out of that rental property. And the school in Horicon is about which is the K-12 school, is about the distance from here to Camp Randall. So the hope is that some of the residents that would be renting those single-family homes in that pocket neighborhood could take advantage of the fact that they can run a business out of their home And they could provide childcare, perhaps for their child, but certainly for a lot of kids that will be in school across the way. So that's also an opportunity to get people doing something more than working in a business, but they can run a business.
Cool, thanks, Tom. Go back to this side. Was there somebody, or we're sticking over here? Okay, great.
Thank you. This is a question mostly for Dr. Sims. You mentioned something about anti-gauge legislation. If possible, could you elaborate more on how Wisconsin's state policies have directly influenced what we are able to do about the housing crisis?
So the word for that is preemption. The state legislature has been very active in preempting local jurisdictions from regulating their housing market in a number of ways. So I mentioned rent control, which I think housers tend to call rent stabilization as a preferable term, and that is preempted as one of the many things that's preempted at the state level. I think we have to be creative about it. So one way that some housers are thinking about this, because Wisconsin's not the only state that has preemptions against rent stabilization ordinances, is to maybe think about sort of rent stabilization as an anti-gouging mechanism. So, this is something that does exist at the state level. It would require us to change some things, in particular the nature of what the state determines as an emergency. So currently, housing is not considered an emergency, but this is the issue with housing struggles have historically been linked to social movements and political struggles. So, if these are things that we want to change, we have to address them politically, and maybe that might be some option for us.
Okay, great. Laura.
I haven't heard any mention about property taxes as part of the affordable housing equation, but I've been around long enough to know, you've got your principal interest, but now property taxes, it's greater than a mortgage payment was when some of us senior citizens bought houses, or, if younger people, it's not just being able to afford the mortgage, it's being able to afford property taxes. So how much is that part of the conversation to make housing more affordable, the increasing bite that property taxes take out of a house payment?
Olivia?
Well, I think the idea is that, I will tell you, in the last year, I've had, in the outlying communities, I've had in-depth conversations with two people, both of them older, both of them raised their families, worked in these communities, and they're seeing themselves being taxed out of their home, their lifelong home. One woman was crying. It's really horrible what's happening, but obviously we don't have the capacity to, change a community's, mill rate but if we can build more housing or create other housing types, it's, people won't have to, go 2 counties away to find something more affordable. They'll be able to at least stay within their community. So that's, focusing that strategy is, the focus of that strategy is really to address that. It would be better if people could actually stay in their houses, and there are different ways that communities are looking at helping older people age in place. And there's a new app out there that's called Nesterly, and they're actually matching older people with younger people who have space in their house. They're completely vetted, older people and students generally. So if you have a room to rent, then you can actually make extra income by having a student either part of the year or all the year. It's up to you, but that's called Nesterly, and that's coming online. It's in 2 states right now.
Yeah, when homeowners are on fixed incomes, it does become a problem when you have a neighborhood change or gentrify, and they don't have the income to pay the property taxes because the taxes keep going up. It's a problem.
I come from California, Los Angeles specifically, and dealing with property taxes is tricky. We did this in the 1970s when we saw lots of appreciation in the housing market. We instituted Prop 13, which had some really strong negative consequences, in particular the funding for schools. It's just one of these challenges. How do you deal with some of the social consequences of people being taxed out of their home? We're seeing this in the north side of Madison in particular. It presents quite a number of sort of policy challenges and how we would address that.
Do you want to say last thought on this? Anybody?
Justice.
Okay, Justice also wants to make a comment about
I
it.
just want to ask you, so that's where the trust come in. I know how to make the property taxes go away. You put it in trust. You just can't make any money off the sale. So if you're willing to get the house out of the market by putting it into trust, you don't have to worry about property taxes. The deal is that you can't have both things. And one of the reasons that property taxes are going up is because people are selling the houses and they're trying to maximize the profit off the sale of the house. So they want both those things. So if you wanted to, and you had a group of people in an area and you want to take all your properties and put it into trust, you would not have to worry about the property taxes as much anymore, and you wouldn't be in danger of losing your house. You just wouldn't be able to get the appreciation from the sale. And so this is where that philosophy about whether or not it's a public good or a commodity starts to matter, right?
And I also think there's state legislation that was passed in the previous administration that keeps, I think it keeps the cap on shared revenue, which forces communities to actually look to property taxes to solve their income gaps, their operating gaps.
We don't have a lot more time. We're going to take two more questions. We have one over here. We're trying to keep it to 8 o'clock and then hang around and talk and party. Go ahead.
Hi, this is for Dr. Sims. Which project in Middleton were you referring to on University Avenue?
Yeah, so this one, it was in the news. I remember reading about it. I looked it up. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I mean, it's the, what is 2019. There was, what's the name of the developer? Somebody here might help me out.
Is it the one across from the Willie Street Co-op? There is something being.
Anthony Graves.
That's it. 39 units.
I think there's something being built there in that location.
Okay, did it go forward then?
It must have.
Okay.
Yeah, it went forward.
It's been modified though.
But it
Smaller and it's smaller
originally
and
meant
fewer
some.
affordable
Okay.
units.
Yeah. It meant significant justice.
I think, part of the point though is, that this is about local approval for LIHTC projects and the sort of significant NIMBYism, so not in my backyard, that these projects face. I mean, in order to get these things, that's part of the compromises that developers have to do, is usually change the affordability mix, do all kinds of, and part of that is a sort of democratic process, right? I mean, we want neighborhoods to be involved in the development process, I think. But at the same time, neighborhoods can be highly exclusionary. So we don't want affordable housing, we don't want low-income folks, and all kinds of images can be presented as part of that. And that's my understanding from what I read from the council debate about what people were saying in terms of who would be occupying that and what that represented for that community.
Yeah, I think this is part of the reason why they rebranded to say workforce housing as opposed to affordable housing. So if it's for the workforce, then it's okay, not just affordable. Anyway, one last question. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a question. The discussion tonight is occurring at a time of very historically low interest rates. Excuse me, my voice is breaking. What's going to happen? I spent a lot of time in lending in my lifetime, financial lifetime. So, and we always underwrote projects on the basis of a not the present rate, but the rate that it might go to, because you don't want to force people or businesses or out. You got to be realistic. At this stage of our economic history, our interest rates are historically very low. So what's going to happen in a few years if this does happen, where rates return to more historical levels? Isn't that going to cause the occupancy costs for the tenants and everything to be maybe even higher than they are now in relation to their income?
I think I want to punt that one to Tom.
That's an interesting question, because we talk about that in my real estate classes. The long and short of it is, with interest rates as low as they are right now, if we're falling behind in building affordable housing, when interest rates go up, we're not going to catch up. So the gap is going to get greater than we have right now. And as long as borrowed money is a major piece of any real estate development, whether it's a single-family home, 20% equity, 80% loan, or if it's multifamily housing construction, 20% equity, 80% loan. That blue slice that I had on my chart, that's half of the rent right there. If you could take interest out of the rental equation, you could drop rent in any market rate unit in Madison by 50%, which would create a huge influx of affordable housing. So
Any last comment about the interest rates? Or Good. Okay, so that's the last question. Listen, it was really difficult to get everybody to stick to 9 minutes because they're really smart and they have a lot to say. But they did it, so let's hear it for our panel. Thank you very much. And this just kind of gives a segment of both what UW is trying to add to the equation of the affordable housing discussion as well as practitioners. So that's really what we want to highlight here. It's not just UW who's doing good work, it's also the practitioners in the community who we have a lot to learn from the university. So I think it's important to say that. So with that, thank you all very much for coming. Stick around, grab a little bit more information about the Dane County Housing Authority job, and mix and mingle and enjoy life. All right, thanks. Take care.
Thanks for Mike, Ronan.